Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. Thanks so much for clicking on the video, and welcome to part 3 in my series on the book by Thomas Sowell, Basic Economics. Today's main points are going to go over work and pay. More specifically, productivity and pay, income as it relates to race and gender, minimum wage laws, and problems in labor markets. So needless to say, there are probably going to be a few very hot, sizzly takes today that I'm sure the online community will discuss gracefully and quite stoically. Let's start with productivity and pay. It's impossible to truly answer the question, what is a person worth? A better question is, what should a person get paid? An employee will obviously try to get the most amount of money possible. On the other side of that coin, an employer is going to offer you the lowest amount they possibly can to the point where you'll still accept the job, especially if there are other candidates out there who are going to do the job for less. Breaking news! Productivity is linked to higher pay.
Wow, who'd have thunk that?
The more productive a company is, the more money it makes. The more money it makes, the greater the chance it can offer more money to its employees.
This guy's a real genius over here.
Those in management positions should provide the tools to their employees that will help them achieve maximum productivity. If not, they sacrifice profits and efficiency. Companies who sacrifice profits and efficiency over time, they ain't gonna make it. Sowell points out that third world countries that don't have efficient modes of transportation like a highway system or modern vehicles, they suffer more profit losses since they're not able to export their goods as fast as developed countries. Moving on to income in terms of race and gender. If you want to see how income levels fluctuate over time, you have to look at data on a per capita basis or a per person basis. The underlying misconception of looking at people in terms of tax brackets or rich or poor is that this line of thinking assumes that these categories are classes, when the fact of the matter is that each individual is their own data point. Following someone who makes $50,000 out of college is different than following people who make $50,000. The fact of the matter is, unless you're highly agreeable or something crazy happens in your life, you're not going to be stuck at $50,000 per year as a salary. You're going to get raises incrementally over time. And so if an economist were to follow you, they would see an increase in your earnings. But if an economist only follows the salary of $50,000, you can see how that looks at a completely different thing than if he follows people who make $50,000. So again, when we're looking at economics and we're trying to study people, you really have to focus on the people and not looking at them in terms of classes. One example of how wages between the sexes equalized over the years comes from actually China, of all places. When physical labor was at a premium, men were paid more than women because their jobs involved more physically demanding and more dangerous work. While all families needed a mother, obviously, they found that additional females consumed more food and resources than they produced, which led to the terrible outcome that China aborted female babies at birth. And they calculated on a per capita basis that the females consumed more food and resources than they produced. And they looked at that purely empirically, and they determined it was a net negative to the group. But as the economy revolutionized and more jobs required less physical strength, the pay gap began to actually close. Those that kept paying men at a higher rate than the market dictated ended up losing efficiency and they lost profits. Those that brought women into the workforce and offered equal pay were actually able to grow and remain competitive. Sowell states that empirical evidence strongly indicates that racial discrimination is less frequent when costs are higher and far more frequent when costs are lower. For example, Sowell states that rent control laws create a surplus of people looking to get into cheap apartments. So there's a surplus of applicants coming in, so landlords know they're going to get their money regardless of who they allow into their building, so that allows them to be more discriminatory in their selection process with applicants. And just as minimum wage laws increase the chances of discrimination due to applicants looking for jobs that pay a higher wage, maximum wage laws actually deter discrimination because there's going to be a lower amount of applicants, which makes employers more desperate to hire. And when you look at things like age, experience, education, and skill set, the wage gap narrows considerably. Even under apartheid in Africa, white business owners, construction crews, and landlords would hire, build, and lease to blacks because it was more economic to do so. This is another example of how if women could be paid less to do the same job, then employers would hire more women since it's economically beneficial. One question Sowell poses in this particular section is about scarcity. He asks, what's more scarce, capital or labor. In rich countries, labor is more scarce, while in poor countries, capital is more scarce. This has implications for how the economy is run. For example, in the Soviet Union, capital was so scarce the equipment was on average about 47 years old. The average age of equipment in the United States was only 17 years because they had the money to purchase newer equipment. Now on to some points on minimum wage laws. From a basic economic standpoint, increasing the price of something creates more of an incentive for whoever produces that thing to create more of them. Obviously, since the price is now increased, they can sell it and get more money. Simultaneously, it decreases demand because now you have to pay more money for that product. So artificially increasing the price of labor, which is what happens when minimum wage laws are enacted, it increases the influx of applicants, but it decreases the amount of job openings. Sowell states that most politicians claim that minimum wage laws are in place to help families achieve a living wage. However, over half of the people who do not make higher than minimum wage are between the ages of 16 and 24, and most of whom don't have kids. Instead, they're living under the roof of their parents, and they don't have any financial dependence. Sowell actually found that minimum wage laws often precede higher unemployment rates, and countries that don't have minimum wage laws experience lower unemployment rates than countries that do have minimum wage laws. Now, I want to be clear that I'm not saying that any of this is fact. I read the book, and I looked at some of his references. They seem to check out, but if you read this book, don't take any of this on face value. You should do your own research and want to make sure that these things make sense based on what you've researched. At the very least, these are points that we do have to reckon with, and it's good to take these in. They're not very mainstream points of view. But nonetheless, in reading this book, I thought it's useful to know, and it's good to discuss it. Sowell claims that people who are not as skilled are the ones who are most affected by minimum wage laws. Labor unions are massive proponents of minimum wage laws, even though most union workers make above minimum wage. Sowell claims that non-skilled young workers are in competition mostly with this group of more skilled union workers. His point here is that union workers have a vested interest in keeping minimum wage laws in place because they face less competition from more unskilled workers who would take their jobs for less money. By the way, if you've gotten any value out of this video, please hit the like button, comment down below, let me know your thoughts, and as always, please subscribe to the channel for more content. Part 4 I will be releasing hopefully next week. But let's move on to the third and final point in today's video, which is special problems in labor markets. I thought this was an interesting point about the unemployment rate, which is calculated by measuring the amount of people within the labor force who are not working. People who are outside of the labor force, by choice or not, are not counted among the unemployed. Sowell's alternative way of calculating the unemployment rate is to calculate the percentage of adult workers who are working among the labor force and not in institutions like universities, hospitals, the military, and prisons. The reason for this is that unemployment rates could be skewed with the current method of measurement. For example, after the 2008 financial crisis, many people lost their jobs and were unemployed for over a year. Finding a job was so difficult that many people just stopped looking for one, which by definition would take them out of the labor force. So the number of people who fell out of the workforce due to prolonged unemployment actually went up. So unemployment numbers then went down. Another hot take here for you. So Sowell is definitely libertarian, and he argues that labor laws, whether enforced by the government or unions, reduces wages for employees. Examples of forced expenses on employers are healthcare and safety requirements. Another view he holds that's quite different from the conventional view is how developed nations place labor factories in undeveloped countries. Companies in developed countries provide working conditions that are very different from what employees in underdeveloped countries are used to. Sowell's belief is that the mutually beneficial relationship between employees in underdeveloped countries and companies in developed countries would be compromised if the world governments or human rights organizations intervened. As he sees it right now, the incentive structures are mutually beneficial. And finally, one more interesting point he mentions about labor unions, which in case you hadn't noticed, he's not a huge fan of. He says labor unions drive unemployment higher and stifle economic growth. This is due to basic supply and demand. If labor unions artificially increase the cost of labor because of their push for minimum wage laws, then employers will not hire as many workers. Now that the price of labor has increased, the cost of the product also has to increase, so companies can recoup the profit lost from the cost of having to pay more to their employees. Now, if employers conspire to keep employees' wages artificially low, then employees will be inclined to work somewhere else in the community, somewhere that offers a higher wage. The consequence of this is consumers now lose out on the resources they would have created elsewhere, since employers won't offer an appropriate wage. That's it for today's video. I hope you got some value out of it. Again, if you did, please like the video, leave a comment down below, let me know your thoughts, and as always, please subscribe to my channel. So until the next video, I'll see you next time.